Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
With just 45 days left in the fiscal year, Capitol Hill is juggling redistricting battles, renewed scrutiny of aging lawmakers, and strategies for budget rescissions. WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller breaks down what's moving, what's stalled, and what it all means for the months ahead. Mitchell, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Well, let's start with recess. We have about a week and a half left of the congressional recess. What are you hearing about what's happening back home in the districts?
Well, it's interesting. This summer we thought was really going to be concentrated on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Republicans had talked a lot before they left here at the Capitol to get back to their districts that they were going to talk about it. They were going to sell it. But there have been relatively few town halls from Republicans, though just one example of what they are doing is in Iowa, Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks did some things on going to manufacturing sites to try to highlight the measures funding for workforce and trade school training. And we've heard Vice President J.D. Vance make some speeches stressing what he calls the working family tax cuts. They're kind of trying to redefine it, obviously, in response to the Democrats saying it's for the wealthy. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been stressing that it will prevent a tax hike in the coming year. But there's an interesting twist here related to federal workers. Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon says he's been getting a lot of questions about the freeze on federal funding for many government programs. And so that's part of the reason I think that some of the Republicans have decided not to do town halls. I know that they sometimes blame activists for just showing up. Democrats deny that. But at any rate, the Democrats, they are calling it the big ugly law, and they are warning it's going to bring cuts to Medicaid, the nutritional assistance program. So we're seeing both parties try to form this narrative during the summer on the legislation as they get ready for those midterm elections next year.
Well, it really is difficult to talk about in practical terms since so many of the provisions are delayed, right?
Right. I mean, a lot of the, for example, some of the tax breaks actually don't go into effect until the following year. And some Republicans have mentioned that. They said they would like to give concrete examples of what is actually happening, and they're having a difficult time doing that. And it's a familiar problem. You'll remember the Democrats also had some issues when they were trying to say great things about the infrastructure bill or the other bills that they had passed when President Biden was in office, because, as you know, these big sprawling pieces of legislation, it's really hard to get, a short, succinct way of saying this is how it's going to help you, my constituent.
Well, we'll see how the conversations play out when everyone gets back. But speaking of home districts, the redistricting conversation has gotten pretty heated lately. What's the latest there?
Yeah, it is on fire right now. After a lot of political drama, including Democrats leaving the state, the Texas state legislature has approved the plan to create 5 new Republican-leaning districts. And in California, lawmakers have approved a plan to redraw district lines there. They're hoping to help Democrats win 5 more seats next year to balance the change in Texas. The California plan still needs approval in a special election to bypass an independent commission that ironically was set up to avoid exactly what is happening right now. If that does happen, Democrats could potentially control 48 of the state's 52 seats. I mean, this is where we're heading in a lot of these states. Whether it's a red state, they're going to have 80 to 90% of the seats, and vice versa with Democrats if Democrats are able to do what they want. President Trump is continuing to put pressure on states like Indiana. Missouri is among the latest to try to add seats, while Democrats are looking at their options everywhere from Maryland to Illinois.
One of the interesting topics that comes up in the context of this redistricting is the replacement candidates. And both sides are talking about the fact that they need younger people to run, right? What are you hearing there?
You have an example here in Texas where you have Lloyd Doggett, a longtime Democratic stalwart for Democrats in Texas. But he, because of this redistricting with the Republicans, now has said that if it goes forward, which it's expected to eventually go into place, that he is not going to run for re-election. He's 79 years old. His district would be redrawn, and Greg Kazar, who's one of the young and up-and-coming Democrats in Texas, would run for that seat instead. And this is the kind of dynamic that we're seeing across the country in various states, with Democrats having older members and younger members coming up. And usually, of course, as you know, the seniority takes preference over the younger people coming up. But the Democrats are really starting to change that. We've seen, unfortunately, 8 lawmakers have died in Congress, and all of them recently have been on the Democratic side. So you're literally seeing a change in generation within the Democratic Party.
So all of that is going to come to a head here in the next couple of years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, with that balance in the House, for example, of only about 4 seats, every single thing that happens, whether it's a redistricting or a lawmaker dying or perhaps another lawmaker leaving for a higher office or going to a state office, all of that just shakes things up. And it's just one seat after another where each party is trying to find the advantage.
I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent. Well, Mitchell, we've talked about recess and redistricting and retirees. Let's stick with our R theme and let's talk about rescissions. We're 45 days from the end of the FY. The topic is coming up again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're right in the heart of this potential pocket rescissions period. OMB Director Russell Vought continues to hold out that threat of a pocket rescission, and we're now in that window ahead of that October 1st start of the fiscal year. The White House arguing it can send another rescissions package and treat the funding as expired on September 30th, no matter what Congress does. However, you have the Government Accountability Office as well as several lawmakers from both sides of the aisle who say they believe this would be illegal, but they also do anticipate a rescissions request will take place when they return from recess in September. Many believe it will target the Department of Education. Still unclear about how big it might be. Some people think it'll be larger than the $9 billion rescissions package that was earlier passed. Some think it'll be a little bit smaller. But at any rate, this is going to be a big part of the talks related to the budget, and it really threatens to blow up the bipartisan talks on the budget, potentially leading to a government shutdown. You mentioned a lot of the things that have been happening while Congress has been out of town. One of them has been strategizing on the Democratic side, trying to figure out what they're going to do. How are they going to handle this if it comes up? Are they going to stand firm and say we're willing to risk a government shutdown? Or on the other side, are they going to hold off and say, well, we better hold our fire here because we're worried about more federal workers losing their jobs?
Well, when the members come back, they're not going to have very long before they're going to have to either pass a short-term continuing resolution or try to get some bills through. What's your sense of how they will make use of the time in September?
Well, they're going to have to act really quickly because obviously they're only going to have a few weeks before that October 1st deadline. So one of the things I'm really interested in is, one, when will this rescissions package come and how will that affect the dynamic? Will it, in fact, blow things up and make things much harder, or will they make some progress very quickly when they return? I think that's going to be the real interesting thing to figure out. And then, of course, we have coming up the big NDAA legislation, which, as you well know, has passed for more than 60 years in a row. It's one of the rare areas where we do have bipartisan agreement on a lot of issues. It includes a 3.8% pay increase for military personnel. There's actually going to be pretty quick action on that. The House Republicans this past week announced that they are going to try to bring it up before the House Rules Committee very soon, likely the week of September 8th, to get that ready for floor debate. And then, of course, the Senate has its version. The differences between the two bills are not that big. The Senate bill is about $880 billion. The House has $850 billion. One thing I would note of interest to members of the National Guard is the House bill has a provision for no-cost dental coverage under TRICARE. The House measure also includes amendments to prohibit the Pentagon from using federal funds to rename bases in honor of Confederate figures. That's the kind of issue that can kind of trip things up a little bit depending on how lawmakers handle it. But I think right now it does appear that the NDAA, as it has been in the past, there will be some hiccups here and there, is likely to move forward fairly soon.
Well, it sounds like we need to hope that they've all caught their breaths over summer vacation because it'll be a mad sprint when they get back.
Right. I mean, they're coming back on September 2nd, and so you literally have less than a month to get the entire budget, or at least a stopgap measure, through the Congress. So it's going to be a very quick sprint here over the next few weeks.
Mitchell Miller is WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent. Mitchell, thanks as always.
You bet.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former Senior Advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites and airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again, and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization. Really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third-generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down, and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one. Coming from the insurance industry, that's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it, share the credit, perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him and as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has Pearls of Wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.